IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. My name is Rohan Seth and I am here today with a very special guest and possibly one of my favorite co-podcasters, I think if that's the correct term, Manoj Keval Ramani. Hi Manoj.
Hey Rohan, thanks for having me.
See, I like to think about us podcasting in sort of as a part of a bigger stage, where I mean that there are stages to how I process the news. The first one is when I read the newspaper or log on to Twitter and see what's happening. The second stage is actually when I have read the news, I come to you to process it because you, of course, have always just been analytical enough to break down everything for me into bite-sized pieces. Your newsletter, of course, is an excellent example of this. But it's not just me who has this privilege. A lot of our students do as well, because you are a star faculty at the GCPP at Takshashila. So, and applications for that are now open. So, dear listener, if you are tuned in, please do consider applying. Manoj and many others are going to be there to teach you. Right. Let's talk China. A lot of noise around DD. Manoj, can you tell me what exactly has happened and why it's such a big deal?
Hey, so in some ways, people who are watching China and who are sort of researching, particularly the technology sector in China, I think they've been hating the regulators for the last 10, 12 days because they keep doing these things on weekends and ruin everybody's weekends. But essentially, this is what happened, right? That Didi is a massive company in China. It's a Chinese company. And it's a massive, massive entity, which is essentially the biggest ride hailing or cab service, sort of like Uber in China, right? It was the biggest company in the country. This was founded in 2012 by a gentleman called Cheng Wei, who, is just 38 years old right now. And he's a former Alibaba executive. And the company has grown significantly since then. Right. So now what happened was that Didi was looking to list on the New York Stock Exchange. And this talk about this listing has been going on for some time. So on 30th June, the Didi Global listed in New York. And it raised a significant amount of money, billions of dollars. And immediately after listing, the shares obviously went up and it was all good. And then what happened was that on the 1st of July, you had the centenary of the Communist Party of China. And there was no action of any sort. But on the 2nd of July, which is Friday, the Cyberspace Administration of China, which is Cyberspace Watchdog, they blocked Didi's China businesses, which is Didi Chuxing. They blocked them from adding any new users. So the app could not add any new users. And they also announced a cybersecurity review of the firm. Right. So this came as a shock to, of course, everybody. And the CAC basically said that, look, we're doing this because there are national security and data security risks. And just about a month or so ago, month and a half ago, China has passed a new data security legislation, which sort of, again, is very broad in some ways. So there's an effort going on to understand what exactly is the critical data and all of that. But it lays out very clear, yet very broad guidelines about national security and data security and storage and all of that. Right. And the concern that CAC is raising here is that they said that they want to conduct a comprehensive examination of cybersecurity risks and continuously improve the sort of cybersecurity work. This is what Didi eventually said when they were pulled up for this. Right. So the government is saying that your listing and your presence over there essentially creates a certain data security and cybersecurity risk. And this was just the first of a series of steps that we saw, right? So soon after that, on the weekend, we saw that there were about, reports came out about how in April itself, there were about 34 technology companies that had been summoned by the Chinese antitrust authorities. And there had been concerns with regard to this data security and cyber security. Yet Didi had sort of gone ahead with this IPO despite there being concerns. So there was clearly some sort of a miscommunication in terms of what Didi thought the regulators wanted and the regulators expected, right? So that is one sort of aspect of it, because there is clear information and clear reporting which tells us that that Didi was clearly unaware of what was happening, and it had serious big sort of companies underwriting that IPO. So Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan Chase, they underwrote that IPO. And Didi sort of in its prospectus also said that, yeah, there could be some problems, but no, it's usually it's a green light in that sense. Yet at the same time, they then faced this particular action. Soon after this, what happened was that you had on Sunday, Chinese regulators ordered that all app stores in China will have to remove Didi Global's app. So Didi's app has to be removed from that, and therefore it cannot anymore operate in the country. So that was the beginning of a series of steps that would be taken. The next day, there were a couple of other transportation sector sort of products, apps which are also penalized, which are also targeted. But that was the sort of beginning of this process where Chinese regulators start to say that, look, we need to make sure that issues regarding the safety of personal information of users is taken care of. Your listing creates a certain kind of problem for us from the point of view of data security and national security. And therefore, we need to now take a complete overview and a review of all of this. This review process can last for about 45 days. It can go a little bit longer also. But that means that Didi, soon after listing, now gets stuck. So it's facing obviously lots of criticism at home from the regulators, but it's also facing lots of criticism from investors in the US, particularly, who feel that they've been sort of caught off guard. So, and Didi itself is now sort of between a rock and a hard place. So that's a huge issue. The company has been very clear to say that, look, like all overseas listed Chinese companies, we store all our domestic data on servers within China, and it's absolutely impossible to pass this data to the United States. So they are trying to address those concerns that are being raised. But it just tells you that this aggressive step that was taken to again pull down one of China's biggest sort of giants, technology giants, and Didi has investments in Indian firms also, is telling you that the party is basically telling businesses that, look, where our national security concerns will be broader because the scope of things is changing, particularly with the evolving technology, and that will mean that you will have to toe the line when we say you must toe the line, or we will impose costs even if they will hurt businesses. We will do it.
Okay, two questions. Firstly, you talked about how the App Store itself has been changed in the sense that Didi apps must be taken down. I don't know how many apps Didi has there. I'm sure there's quite a few. But what happens to apps that are already on phones? Is the platform still operational? And secondly, this is to a larger picture. See, because we did another podcast which talked about regulation in Alipay, and the timing of that was also so that the IPO of Alipay was supposed to launch. And so, do you think the timing is strategic, or do you think these are two events that I'm finding a pattern where there isn't one?
Right. So, firstly, let me just take the first question first, right, which is about whether the app is available to people who are currently using it. I think it will be available to people who are currently using it, from what I understand. So, I think that will continue. I think what's also happened is that, like you said, there are additional apps under the sort of DD umbrella, and those apps have been removed. It took a week. So, this Friday, which was last Friday, Chinese regulators ordered the removal of 25 apps operated by DD. This includes Didi Delivery, Didi Vendor, Didi Chat, Didi Bus, and a whole list of them. So the entire operation essentially has faced censure. It's not just that one Didi Chuxing faced censure. The entire operation faced censure. And again, there has been enough reportage from the Wall Street Journal, from Caixin, which tells us that the cyberspace administration is taken this thing very seriously, and they've sort of put their foot down with regard to this. At the same time, if you look at sort of some of the changes, some of the reportage from Chinese party state media, so Global Times specifically had a piece which said, and I'm going to quote them, which says that the hypothetical scenario of the US coercing Chinese firms to submit data could happen. So said experts, citing the US government's track record of stopping at nothing to forcing businesses to surrender. And he talks about how even the foreign ministry said time and again that it is the US which has demonstrated that it can open backdoors and illegally obtain user data. So the possible intimidation of US listed Chinese firms regarding data transfers could be one of the biggest risks for the likes of TD. This is another analyst saying so. So I think you can see that there is a clear stress that the Chinese administration is feeling, and it's a clear anxiety that they're feeling, and they're therefore saying that, look, we need to decouple as much as we can, or if not decouple, at least provide enough security for our systems and for our data. Because, and again, what is the national security or strategic value of this data? And what all data are we talking about is another matter altogether, right? So employment may have certain value, but transportation data to what degree, of what kind, has what value, that is unclear. So at the moment, you're basically saying we are creating a blanket fence that that things can't go out there, and I think that is important to note. That so your first question was that they took down all DD businesses. It took them a week to do that, or at least the major ones, so 25 major ones. And the other thing is that this was their primary concern with regard to this. Now, why I don't conflate the Alibaba case and this case is because I don't think that in the Alibaba case this was the motivation. It wasn't data security and its listing in the US which was an issue. The primary concern in the Alibaba case was, at least from my understanding, it wasn't this data security as an issue. It was with regard to the spread of financial technology and the systemic financial risk that fintech was bringing in terms of Alibaba's holdings, in terms of Ant Financial's holdings, and in terms of how loans were dispersed, who bore the risk, and what could be the contagion if there was a failure at one level in the institution, and the government's ability, or the state's ability, or the party's ability to not be able to control that. So to me, and they were trying to specifically create rules with regard to fintech to be able to control that risk. And Alibaba has, Jack Ma was clearly resisting that. And you remember, right, in late October, he had given this speech which talked about pawn shop mentality of bankers and all of that in the banking system. So to me, there were different issues. I don't think I would conflate them. This is a product of specific issues related to data security and how, in some ways, the Chinese administration today is looking at data security.
Right. I think I have a few more questions, and it's quite fascinating, actually, some of the stuff that you said. But let's take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Would like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Cred, Ciet, and Global Victoria. Thank you so much for making this possible. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by the hilarious and extremely charming illusionist and therapist Suhani Shah. They talk about different aspects of magic like sleight of hand, mind reading, mentalism, and more. The Habit Coach completed 500 episodes, 500, and Ashton has a special message for us on the occasion. Do check that out. We had Lekini Desai, founder of the India Ethnic Company, talk to Varun Digarala about their story and the Hutke marketing idea that made them popular. On Naan Curry, South Africa just celebrated World Chocolate Day. They took us through the origins, history, economics of chocolate, and shared their memories. On Tere Mere Raste, Keshav Chaturvedi shares an interesting story from Leh. Check out an updated version of the Traveling Professor's Diary. It's now rechristened as Smarter with Sid. Same old brain filled with new stories and insights. This time, listen to know why you should keep things simple. And finally, check out Global Victoria Tech Talks. This one is in partnership with Global Victoria, the trade arm of the Government of Victoria and Australia. The edtech and gaming industries are booming in Victoria, Australia, and this series is meant to showcase that. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Hi, welcome back to our conversation with Manoj. So Manoj talked about why this and the Alipay case are different. And I sort of want to go a little broader, if that's okay. Can we talk about what this means for US-China relations? Well, maybe like to be a little more specific, what does it mean for like further tech cooperation between the two countries, Manoj?
I'll get to that. I just want to be a little bit more pedantic and sort of ties into the US-China relationship thing, because I told you that last Friday you saw these 25 apps being taken down, other apps of DD. A day later, on Saturday, you saw the Cyberspace Administration again announcing changes to the measures for cybersecurity review. These are sort of draft changes that they're proposing to the legislation. And essentially what they're saying is that, look, companies holding data of more than 1 million users must now apply for cybersecurity approval when seeking listings in other nations because of the risk that such data and personal information could be, quote, affected, controlled, and maliciously exploited by foreign governments. So that's as clear as you can get in terms of what their anxieties are. And again, when you put a threshold like 1 million users, that's such a low threshold that just about every company worth its salt or of any sort of value will essentially fall within that bracket. So essentially, all companies will have to go through this particular review, and these reviews can last for a long period of time. So I think that's something that the Chinese government is essentially telling the American administration that look, we are going to be very wary. Now, that's a double-edged sword, right? You're essentially also saying no to foreign capital, but you're also probably trying to, and I'm assuming here, guide foreign capital to come to China via Hong Kong. So you're essentially trying to tell your major firms that you don't go out here, you don't go register yourselves in tax havens, and you don't go out and then list in New York or London or wherever else. Rather, you want to raise foreign capital, you want to raise money, you do it via Hong Kong. So you're also directing your own giants to go in a certain way. And you're also creating more sort of, you're creating greater relevance for Hong Kong, at least as far as I understand. These are potential outcomes that that you're doing. In terms of the message that you're sending the American administration and the West in general is that, look, we see specifically areas of new technology, data governance and all that. We see this sort of the Chinese concept of data sovereignty in practice when they are doing these things. Because honestly, that concept of data sovereignty is this abstract notion which none of us really understand what it means tangibly. And you've worked on data transfer issues and all of that. And what does that mean? Does it mean that you have to store it in your country? Does it mean that you need to take security clearances before you access it? Or does it mean that only your countries, your companies which are registered in your countries, which are also run by your citizens or nationals, only they can access data? What does that mean? I think some of this is now sort of, you're seeing flesh and blood coming into that particular concept. And one of the things is that, there is a risk if you list abroad and you raise foreign capital. So we want to put that risk here. You also have to store data here. Anytime you even want to share that data, there are new rules that are coming in place with regard to how it can be classified, sorted, stored, and then shared. And transfer will be a whole other ballgame. So you're seeing some of that happen, and that will impact the relationship between the United States and China. I mean, I think the Economist, in their assessment of this, gave the sort of one of the sort of best assessments of this. Right? They said that, look, this is, and I'm quoting them, this is the starkest effort yet to disconnect China or Chinese businesses or China Incorporated from American capital markets. And there is a hit, of course, that Chinese enterprises will take because, over the last decade, Chinese enterprises have raised over $76 billion from the US capital markets. Just in the last year, they've raised about $13 billion. So there's a huge hit that you're taking, and you're saying, I'm okay to take that hit because I see that this is of strategic value. So again, that's essentially how the relationship is playing out at an international level. At a domestic level, like I said, this is the party in the state, essentially telling private businesses that your motive of profit maximization, when it collides with our motive of our understanding of what it means to be strong and what we define as strategic interest, then we will trump you. And whatever the cost of that is, will have to be borne. Even if it means that you lose significant business, even if it means that you lose market share, even if it means that you fail, it's okay. We are willing to bear that cost, which is very different from, say, 5, 10, 15 years ago, when sort of we think of conceptually this era of Deng Xiaoping's era of growing rich, which continued, for many, many decades after late 1970s and 80s. The idea is that today becoming strong is important, and the definition of becoming strong is how the party is defining it. Part of this is intensified party control over things. And if becoming rich as an objective for private enterprises collides with the objective of becoming strong, then too bad for you.
Right. You mentioned growing rich, which is, of course, in your excellent book, Smokeless War. My copy is actually coming the day this podcast is going to be aired. So I'm quite excited to read that. But I think my final question, I think, is about is about the terminology that's been used in coverage around this thing. They've talked a lot about barbaric growth. Now, to me, I've never seen growth being referred to as barbaric. I mean, explosive, sure, and generally it's adjectives that appreciate the fact that companies are growing. Talk to me about why is this growth barbaric, and why are they? Is there a strategic move behind why it's being termed this way?
Right. So this terminology I think you're talking about was recently by the State Administration for Market Regulation, which is different from the cyberspace regulator CAC. So the SAMR is the key market regulator, right? It deals with a lot of things, and it's been at the forefront of all your antitrust action that we have seen, whether it's with Alibaba, with Tencent, with the others, even with Didi, they were also fined on antitrust. So also in the last week, we've seen antitrust fines being given out for deals that were signed. I think some 22 companies were given out fines of 500,000 yuan. Regulators also want to compete to show that they can do, I can one up you in some way. But this, what you're talking about, I think it was used this week or last week rather, in the context of the SAMR, essentially blocking the merger of two of China's biggest video game live streaming platforms. And both of these are backed by Tencent Holdings, and they were looking to merge. And they basically blocked it again on grounds of antitrust issues, basically saying that this would create this would end up restricting competition and may damage the interest of consumers. Now, in that context, it's the SAMR which said that, antitrust operations are going to be like, the sword hanging over the head of China's tech giants. And our objective is to move from a stage of barbaric growth to one of orderly development under the rule of law. So you read that barbaric growth along with the idea of orderly development under the rule of law. If you go back to Kai-Fu Lee's book, and I'm sure you've read Kai-Fu Lee's AI Superpowers, in that he talks about this environment in China where and he talks about it from the point of view of a positive for Chinese tech businesses competing with Western tech giants, and he sort of paints it as this sort of wild west environment in which people are copying, people are doing things, people are cutting deals, and legislation hasn't caught up, and there is a free for all in some ways in the market, and companies are trying to expand their market share, because if you expand your market share, you become somewhat insulated from regulatory action because you become systemically important. If you think of that, which is what Kai-Fu Lee was talking about as a positive, because that sort of gladiatorial mentality is what he had called it, if I'm correct in the words. And today the state is basically saying that is barbaric growth because it is uneven, it is unrestricted, it is essentially looking at profit and market share at all costs. And that's something that we will no longer accept. So think of it as this, that there was a phase in which the Chinese administration was basically saying, grow, prosper, do what you can, innovate, copy, do everything else, but get to a point where you're at the frontiers of things in some way. Today, and it did not mind people becoming big enough that they become systemically important. In fact, in some ways, the capacity of these private entities has been leveraged by the party state to be able to achieve some of its objectives. So, for example, with regard to rural linkages to urban markets through e-commerce or AI or things like that, they have used these systems. But today they are saying, look, you cannot become alternate power centers, because that's the corollary from all of this, right? At the end of the day, if somebody becomes too big to fail, that entity is an alternate power center. So you're saying, look, I'm not going to tolerate alternate power centers. And that's what Xi Jinping is saying, which flows from this idea of becoming becoming strong, centralization of power, and all of that, and control under the core, as they would call it. So that's the sort of juxtaposition of barbaric growth to today orderly development under rule of law, which basically means you follow what the party structure, what the structures that the party is creating, and those, it's not like those didn't exist in the past; they've been strengthened further, and you're saying they will be strictly implemented. There will be stricter implementation because we don't want to see the creation of alternate power centers, particularly when it comes to issues of data, because that is also relevant from the state's point of view. Because, for example, if you look at, say, security-related data, traffic-related data, if you look at, financial data, it's also relevant for the state to have access to these things. And there have been tussles between Beijing and private entities over access to this data. I mean, I think a couple of years ago, when they were setting up this social credit system, there was a point of time in which there were these questions that, okay, if everybody's going to share data to be able to create that system, what about proprietary data for firms? How do you do that well while sort of making sure that your competitors don't get an advantage over you and all of that? And one of the solutions for that was that a central agency was sort of created where data would be pulled in from everybody, and that you would have some sort of anonymization, and you would protect corporate interests also. I don't quite know what happened to that agency or whether if that was effective or not. But it just tells you that the state was bargaining some time back. Today it's saying we're not going to bargain. If it means we'll sacrifice you, we'll sacrifice you. And that's the shift. And they're saying that's what we mean by when we're saying orderly development under rule of law. Follow what we are saying, or face the consequences.
I think I'm at a loss for words, because it's, when you put it like that, I don't know. I mean, of course, Kai-Fu Lee's book is peerless in the insight that it provides into the Chinese competition ecosystem. But this new approach from the state, not sure what to make of it, but they seem to know what they're doing so far. I think on that very, very non-insightful note by me, and after a wonderful explanation of things by you, I think we can end on that note. So thank you so much for taking the time, Manoj, and thank you, dear listener, for joining us.
Thanks. Take care.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Feeling overwhelmed, anxious, struggling with too many obstacles, don't know where your life is headed? Well, if you are dealing with one or all of these, tune into the Positively Unlimited podcast, because in each episode, I share a life lesson, a life hack, a pro tip that can help you get your life back on track. All episodes are available on the IBM website, IBM Podcast app, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts from.